The information provided is not a substitute for legal and other professional advice where the facts and circumstances warrant. People should always consult their own legal or other professional advisors and discuss the facts and circumstances that apply to their specific circumstances. The information shared on Ask the Landlord is for educational purposes only.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Ask the Landlord with your favorite landlord, Albert Dweck. I'm Melissa. I'm one of Albert's producers and a former New York City renter. And together, we're going to be asking this landlord some questions. How's it going today, Albert?
It's going well, Melissa. How are you doing?
I'm doing so great. I have a great question for you today.
Okay.
So, my neighbor is so loud and disrespectful. What can the landlord do about that?
Oof. I mean, I think you're asking, like, how do I get my neighbor to make less noise so I can live, peacefully in my home, right? Is that the question you're asking?
That's the question.
Right. So I think it depends actually where the neighbor is in the relative to you, in the building, how many people are in the building with you. And I think, everyone who's lived anywhere has had a situation where someone was being too loud or not respectful of their, quiet enjoyment. So that's an official term, quiet enjoyment. It's like when you sign your lease, you're entitled to, quiet enjoyment. Basically, being in your own home and, it being normally quiet. Obviously, according to the law, there are some hours where, you're not supposed to. You can have loud music or whatever up to a certain decibel level, and beyond that time, it's not allowed, right? So, you have the law that which you should look up in your municipality for what's allowed and what's not allowed. Does that make sense? I mean,
It does.
when I say that, does that make sense? Meaning, what I want you to think about when you're asking the question is, I'm going to take you through like a systematic way of thinking about the questions, the answers, so that we could prepare and answer it most effectively, and you could for yourself. Like, ultimately, in these with this podcast, is what we want to do is make sure that people know how to think through and have the tools to deal with these things most effectively for themselves, right? So someone's making noise around you, and it's not you, and it's not coming from your home, right? And obviously, these rules go for you in the same way they go for the person that's making the noise, right? So, so it's important to know in your local municipality what's an acceptable level of noise, what hours, things like that. So we're assuming that your question is coming from a place where you're saying, oh, someone's outside of the acceptable noise and it's becoming a nuisance, right? So, and these are different things. Like, the first thing that I would do as a neighbor would be to reach out to the neighbor and to let them know, hey, I'm here. I'm Melissa, right? I'm doing this and this, and I just wanted you to know I can hear you, and it's disturbing me. Is there anything we could do about that? And most often my experience is that takes care of it. People, oh, they didn't know they were disturbing you, right? Oh, I didn't know I was disturbing you. I didn't know. Oh, you can hear me. I didn't know you can hear me. Or, oh, this is just a real celebration that we're having, and it'll be over at such and such a time. Would that be okay if it went on for this such amount of time? So the first thing that I would do is neighbors have a conversation amongst themselves, right? That would be the first thing. Then you have a neighbor, let's say, that for whatever reason is not listening to you, you can't get through to. Okay. Obviously, finding some other means of communication to communicate your situation effectively. It could be a letter, an email, a text. If you can't get through by phone, right? Making sure that these things are done. So, what's going to happen is when you have an issue like this with your neighbor, it just doesn't go to someone else immediately. First, you say, look, you try to call the person, you can't get through. You try to, you write them an email, you go over there, nothing, again, not confrontational. Just say, hey, by the way, I can hear you and I'm doing this thing. I'm studying for an exam. I have this big project that I'm working on at work. I don't have anywhere to go and I have to do this here, whatever. Okay. I just want you to know. So can you turn it down for me, or is there a time that we could agree on that works for you to do that? Okay. So that'd be the first thing I would do. And I think your question is really getting at, what if I was really nice to the person and I went over there, or I called them and they said, screw you, and I'm going to do what I want to do, right? I think that's what you're saying.
Exactly.
There's different situations, right? So one thing I think you're bringing up, which a lot of people don't realize, and a lot of leases have this, is if it's coming from an apartment above you, which happens often, is that the apartments usually have to be covered in 80% carpet. Many people don't know that, and a lot of leases do say that it's up to the tenant to put carpeting, right? So now it's either in your lease, or you should check your lease that if let's say someone gives you hardwood floors and you're above somebody or a tile or whatever, very often these leases say, oh, you're required to carpet the place up to 80%, or someone is, so that, that would be a big mitigator of sound usually.
Right. But realistically, a tenant, I don't think is going to put in carpet, right? Maybe area rugs.
Well, no, I'm with you. Area rug.
Right.
So it's not, obviously, many residents who sign a lease, and you should read the lease when you sign it. It very often requires you as a tenant to carpet your apartment up to 80% of the floor area. So while wall-to-wall carpeting, installing wall-to-wall carpeting is expensive and permanent, it helps with noise mitigation a lot, but also area rugs do as well, and so does furniture, right? So that's something that you'll want to check if the issue is being escalated. You'll want to make sure, check your own lease, obviously, as a reference would be, hey, I just wanted to check here. The person above me is making a lot of noise. Aren't they supposed to have like carpeting? It's not, the tenant above you signed a lease with the landlord that says that they're supposed to have carpeting. The landlord's job is to enforce that. So the landlord might notice the tenant accordingly, right? The landlord might also notice the tenant and say, listen, the person below you or your neighbor is complaining, and I, has tried to communicate with you about keeping that down. Would you, what was the situation? I just want you to be sensitive about that. Can you do that? Please, and that's another, I think also when people are communicated with by the landlord in writing, that also helps with escalating the issue appropriately. And then, so I went to sort of knowing the laws. I think a lot of common sense comes into play here. Now I gave you some things that pieces of information about carpeting and furnishing that most people don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I did not know that about the carpet.
No, right? So a lot of people don't realize that at least has that information in it already, or should. So that now, and obviously you went to the landlord and you asserted yourself there, right? Now another thing you have to do is obviously you could call the police. You could say, hey, this is and you can look up the law. You say, oh, this person is making noise past this hour and it's above a certain, the police will say if it's above a certain decibel level, they'll come and test it. And then, then they'll say, hey, to the person from the police, please turn it down. So that's where it goes. It escalates. So that's sort of how I would take it. I would go, understand the context is very important for all these things. Like what's going on? Is there a party? Also look, if you're a neighbor and people have parties and it's nice to be neighborly, it's nice to tell someone, by the way, I'm having people over, I'm having a celebration. It's going to be noisy from this time to this time. You do the same thing to them. So, it's a good practice to, we're a community in the world, right? So we want to, get along with our neighbors and communicate effectively with them to say, listen, I'm having a party. I understand it's totally fine. You're having a celebration, blowing off some steam, whatever, I just want you to know I'm doing this thing. It's a little disturbing for me. I'm filming a podcast, I need some quiet. So those are ways you could start understanding the situation. So that's what I would do.
Right. Because like the example I was thinking of was if you have a neighbor above you, 5 a.m, likes to wake up and just vacuums, they might not realize that you can hear it below them. So just communicating with them right up front, that's like a fantastic idea.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Is there another time we could work out? Some situations that I've encountered, I have a tenant, let's say, someone told me they have a tenant with maybe special needs, and the child is making noise by banging on the floor or something like that. That happens. So, in that instance, there's already making sure that there's carpet, right? What part of the day does that happen? What time? Making sure that maybe there's some extra soundproofing that can be put in to mitigate that it's possible, so that would be something that the landlord would do, or speak with the tenant that's causing the noise to do, if that couldn't be resolved in some way.
Absolutely. I would think if there's a pattern, if you have a musician in the building or something like that, you ask them numerous times, then you ask the landlord, then you would call the police if it gets to that level, right?
Yeah. You'll find a way to coexist. Everyone's got things they have to do for whatever reason, and it's I find that the best way to resolve these issues is to address them straight up and say, listen, I realize you have to practice, so you have to do your thing. It's disturbing to me. Can we find out which times that these work so that I'm not doing my sleeping or whatever,
Right. But that's also one of the beautiful things, and one of the reasons we all moved to New York is the hustle bustle of the city, and it comes with these, nuances. So
sometimes it does, and it's the question that you asked is a fairly common question, and it happens, and it's hard. Sometimes neighbors don't always get along, and as a landlord, tenants sometimes call me and say, oh, so and so, I'm not getting along with them, and I don't like this person, and it's a difficult question because I have to speak to them separately, and I have to tell them, listen, I can't make you get along, right? But you're neighbors, and let's find a way to coexist, because it'll be more pleasant for everybody if you don't have to be friends, We just have to find a way to be respectful of each other's privacy and space, and just the way someone wants to live. And it's important to communicate and have that. And I think to the extent we can have a good dialogue about it, usually most of these problems get solved. And then if they can't, and someone says, they don't listen, then the landlord can certainly take the matter to court, where, the one tenant is interrupting the quiet enjoyment of the other tenants. And that's happened too, where, someone just decides without regard, for any of the other people, then that person becomes a problem. So the landlord would then have to take a legal action, after, again, and I would give the landlord similar advice: go talk to the person, make sure you're communicating effectively, appeal to them on a human level, and then, obviously if they're going to be belligerent or not communicative and just continue to do that, it's obviously called law, things like that. So that's how I would handle that situation.
Right. All right. That was really informative. That was really great. Thank you so much. I think the carpeting is a huge takeaway, and just the steps of action that you really laid it out there. So thank you. I really appreciate that. For more episodes, please subscribe to Ask the Landlord on your favorite podcast platform. We'd appreciate it if you left a review on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to watch the show, check out our Ask the Landlord YouTube channel. If you have a question for Albert, feel free to contact him on Instagram at Ask the Landlord, and check out his TikTok at Ask the Landlord. Bridging the gap between landlords and tenants, this has been Ask the Landlord. Thanks for listening.